not doing a lot of trade within itself is because of poor infrastructure, and there's a lot that still needs to be done. As a landlocked country and as a small kingdom, we have taken a view that we need to be export-based. But in being export-based, we would like to trade more with Africa and do more business with Africa to grow the economy, to improve the standard of living of our people. And we strongly believe that the future is in Africa when it comes to trade. And we therefore are looking at certain levers. One of the levers is finance. And the Africa Development Bank is playing that very important role of providing the necessary finance to make sure that economies in Africa do invest in infrastructure and so that the economies can grow. So we strongly believe that this intra-trade percentage, which is very low at the moment, between 14 and 18%, needs to be increased to match that of the global other continents, so that we can increase the value of Africa. We strongly believe in the program and the agenda of the African Union as a country, and we would like to promote this Africa continental trade and be a critical player when it comes to that.
President Tshisekedi, if you can give me a sense of what the Continental Free Trade Area means to the Democratic Republic of Congo, sir.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. Just as the previous speakers, I would like to first and foremost thank President Obiang Nguema Mbasogo for the warm welcome extended to us. I also wish to congratulate the President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Adesina. I must say that I have great admiration for this gentleman, and whenever I exchange views with him, I discover the opportunities that the African Development Bank can offer us. So I would like to seize this opportunity to plead in favor of a general capital increase of the bank so as to enable the bank to further promote and facilitate economic growth and development in Africa. As for us in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we fully subscribe to the ideal of regional integration in Africa because we are convinced that it is key to the development of our continent. 18% for intra-Africa trade is, in my view, a very low figure, which means that there is much room for us to improve, not only to the benefit of our economies, but also in terms of human development. And this can be achieved through the building of infrastructure, but there is also a significant potential in my country, which is the energy potential and capacity. And I do believe that we are focusing on other projects, whereas my country, through the formidable Inga site, can provide energy to the whole of Africa. Economic growth also needs to be achieved through industrialization, but for industrialization to become a reality, we need to have power available. And if the Inga site were to be developed to its full capacity, it could be the solution to the energy gap in Africa. And as regards industrialization, we also need to look at one other aspect, which is economic diversification. And this would be possible. The Democratic Republic of Congo was in fact a victim of its vast endowment. It might be a contradiction in terms, but the enormous mineral wealth that we have is somewhat a curse. And we believe that the diversification of the economy will help us provide jobs to our population, to our youth, and will also help open our economy. And of course, in order to achieve all of this, we need to have a conducive security environment. In order to be able to develop, Africa has to be in peace. And as President Obiang Nguema has underscored, significant efforts were made in this country, which is a true economic miracle, because a lot has been done for peace to become a reality. If we're not able to face up to the challenge of peace in Africa, then our dreams will remain just that, dreams. So we should first try to do away with all these useless and stupid conflicts that we have throughout the continent, be they tribal in nature or due to any other reason. And let us make sure that this free trade area will help Africans work hand in hand in the spirit of our founding fathers and those who were the origin of our independence in Africa. If we hold each other's hand, if we make this free trade area a reality, I am convinced that we will provide a better future to our populations.
Back to Southern Africa and bring the voice into the conversation of the Kingdom of Lesotho. And again, being a landlocked country, what Africa integration means to you, Your Majesty.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Allow me to start off my remarks in a similar fashion like those who have spoken before me, to convey my deepest gratitude to His Excellency, the President of Equatorial Guinea, for the warm hospitality that His Excellency and his government has provided to us since our arrival in this wonderful city of Malabo. I would also like to congratulate and commend the leadership of President Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, and thank him for the work that he is doing to position this bank, our bank, as a leader and catalyst for African development, for African economic development and integration. We thank you. Now, speaking on behalf of Lesotho and Basotho, I would like to say we, for many years now, have believed in the value and worth of economic integration. We do believe that greater integration, particularly for us small landlocked countries, can bring greater prosperity. And that is why we've always supported the efforts of SADC to increase integration in our region, because, as I've said, we believe in the worth and value of integration. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just say that usually I would not be sitting in panels of this nature. My job does not allow me to do so. But in recent years, the African Union and the African leadership under the African Leaders Nutrition Initiative, supported by the ADB, have given me an assignment which has forced me to sit in panels of this nature. And in that assignment, they have given me a specific task to remind you and to remind us as leaders that yes, it is important to build physical infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure that we have seen in the videos, the roads, the bridges, the ports, the airports. Those are all very important for our economic development and for our economic growth. But I am tasked also to remind you that there is another form of infrastructure that we also need to develop, which unfortunately up until now we have neglected. And that is what some refer to as the grey matter infrastructure. If we do not pay enough attention and if we do not invest and build this grey matter infrastructure, I would like to believe that the efforts that we are expanding and the resources that we are pouring into physical infrastructure will not be as effective as we want them to be. Because the grey matter infrastructure is about developing the human being. It is about developing the human being mentally and also physically. Now, in order to do this, in order to holistically develop the human being, so that that human being, he or she, can be a productive somebody, that he or she can contribute to the development of their communities, to the development of their countries, we have to take care of the basics. That human being, from day one, from the beginning of life, he or she has to be well nourished. And once that human being enters into the world, we have to make sure that he or she is well fed in a nutritious fashion. As that child grows up, we have to make sure that he or she is healthy. We have to make sure that that child is well educated. So, and that is how we develop the grey matter infrastructure. If a child is well nourished, healthy, well educated, he or she will grow up into a productive citizen of our countries, a productive citizen of the continent. And therefore, all of this infrastructure will be in good hands and will be used productively, innovatively, with imagination. That is why, for the past 5 years, if not more, I've been calling on the ministries of finance to pour money into ending malnutrition and stunting. I've been calling on ministries of finance and our ministers of finance to pour money and resources into proper health and to education so that we can develop this infrastructure I'm talking about and fully develop the human capital of our continent.
Thank you, Your Majesty.
So that is where I'm coming from. Thank you.
President Obiang Nguema, if you can give us a sense of the plans that Equatorial Guinea has over the next 12 months to fast-track its place in African integration.
Thank you very much. To begin, I wish to thank the heads of state that have decided to take part in this meeting, to the President of the African Development Bank for having supported us to host this assembly. The African Development Bank, which for us was an impossible task or very difficult. We didn't believe that we would be able to host this huge event. And now we see that we are already on the way to closing this event. I wish to thank the governors who have participated and to all participants, to all the experts who are here for having made possible this massive participation, because it has nothing to do. You cannot. What we have achieved is like the meeting that the bank has held in other places. To answer your question about what the integration of the continent and the free trade zone is, this is an old idea. I remember in 1980, they started asking African countries to integrate themselves in regions and sub-regions. Many of those countries have created regional or sub-regional integration spaces, which are now operating satisfactorily. But the idea was to continue. I think when we talk of a free trade zone for Africa, it is precisely for Africa to be able to cooperate, all the countries among themselves, because let us not forget that after our independence, Africa continued depending on other countries economically. In other words, we do not as yet have enough capacity to feel authentic countries with good economies. That is why we have to continue working. There are obstacles and difficulties challenges that many times we Africans have to overcome. First, we have the linguistic or cultural barriers, because you can see solidarity for cultural reasons or linguistic reasons many times become an obstacle for the integration of Africa. I believe that that should not be a difficulty. We have overcome the first proposal for Africa to work economically in sub-regions. Now, what is free trade? I think it will be very helpful to put an end to dependency, the dependency that we have now. African countries have to promote South-South cooperation. We speak of South-South cooperation, but it is not a reality yet. When we say South-South, that means that we have to have economic and trade relations with other African countries, because we cannot continue forever to depending on the major countries. And that is why we need integration in Africa, and a free trade zone, I think, is something extremely positive that can help us to change the present situation in Africa. In Equatorial Guinea is in the region of Central Africa, but we don't share the same culture. But thanks to the integration that we have accepted, we have managed to make the most of that fact, and it has facilitated the development we have achieved in this country, because the SAMAC region has a currency which is convertible, and that currency makes it easier for us to have an economy allowing our economic activities, and so that we can have a single concept of development among ourselves, how to develop our economy. We are achieving it, but we have to give up sometimes that selfishness. In Africa, you see national selfishness. Everyone wants to withdraw into a shell instead of liberating themselves and learn from others, because when we talk about cooperation, that means we have to appreciate the advantages of a country. We have to learn from those advantages and those opportunities, because we are not always going to be thinking about the major developed countries. It is difficult. We are not going to develop or learn from the United States, from China, from Russia, and other major countries. We have to start depending on our capacity. So I think that is the reason why I think it is very good to have integration in Africa, to have a free trade space, to also facilitate the possibilities in Africa. We have to industrialize Africa. We are not going to start with huge industries, but we are going to begin transforming our raw materials, because we see that our raw materials are exported. I think what we need to prioritize is the transformation in situ, the transformation of our raw material. That is how I understand the concept of African integration, to have a free trade space and many opportunities to develop our respective countries. Thank you very much.
Your Excellencies, I'm going to ask you to bear with me right now. We have got 25 minutes of satellite time left. What that means, gentlemen, is that we are broadcasting across the African continent for another 25 minutes only. There's so much to share on this platform, and I certainly want to get another round, 2 rounds of questions across all of the experts that we are faced with today. So I'm going to ask you to be cognizant of the time along with myself, and I don't mean to be rude if I interrupt you at any stage, but I do believe that in the spirit of Africa integration, we need to make the most of this communication platform, meaning the most of the next 25 minutes. President Adesina, you put some stats up, in fact, many stats, sir, and I need to congratulate you again on the results that we're seeing from the African Development Bank. Let's start with the free movement of people. You highlighted that 25% of African countries allow you to enter with no visa, 24% allow you to enter with visa on arrival. But I want us to focus on the 51% where visa is still needed for Africans to move freely into that country. How do we change the status quo? We've made great strides, but there's a 51% target that we need to look at now.
Well, first of all, is that, investment is like water. It goes to where there's the least resistance. If you take a look at the countries that have actually made the most in terms of visa openness index, they happen to be the ones also that have the highest level in terms of investment. Today, if you go across Africa, you're looking at those that have made progress. You're looking at Mauritius, looking at Seychelles, you're looking at Togo at the top, you're looking at Benin at the top, you're looking at Ghana at the top, you're looking at Ethiopia and Kenya at the top. All these countries happen to be the one wherein investors are also pouring into. So there's a very strong and direct correlation between the labor mobility, the ability to capital also to be able to move, because both have to move together, and investment. So I was saying the 51% have to learn from the fact that the others that are actually opening up their borders happen to be, and also giving people visas, are the ones that are able to do this. The second thing I want to say, with regard to this, is that as an African, if you go into, Africa is our home. It should be at home everywhere, and we got to make sure that even the visa, I think I want to commend the African Union for the tremendous job they've done in terms of the African Union passport. But recently I was talking to Aliko Dangote, it's Africa's richest man, and he said he went to a country and he had the African Union passport with him, and they say ask him for a visa. And so we got to make sure that we make it easy for people to be able to move. And finally, it's not just the formal businesses that need to move. Today, 70 to 80% of those doing business in Africa are in the informal sector. Majority of those are small and medium-sized businesses. So it's not just about one border post, it's not just about infrastructure, it's also about trade facilitation. How do you get people easier to get travel documents? East Africa, for example, is doing a great job of that. With just one ID card, you can move all across the place. So we have to move the informal trade also to more formal trade, and in particular, support women. Women get harassed across the borders. I'll give you one example. I know, you want to push us, but I think people need to hear it. I was once on a plane, and in 1992, I was traveling from Lagos to Abidjan. I got on the plane, I had with me only a small computer. That's a compact that you have in those days. I was looking for a place to put it. I couldn't find any place to put it. And there are all these market women. They came on this plane. They're all fat like this. And
President Adesina, I hope you know where you're going with.
I know what I'm going with. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, when they got on the plane, I realized that they've been harassed. They put bales of clothing around themselves and they tie it with tapes because they harassed them, the custom people, with too much people to pay. So when I got on the plane, they were all taken off the tapes. I found out they were actually quite thin, and it was all what they did. But here is the import of what I'm saying. I try to put my computer in, and they say, no, how many times do you fly this plane every week? I said, it depends. They said, look at these women. They may not be educated, with the baskets on their head, with all these things wrapped around them. They fly this plane twice every day. And so please, Mr. Doctor, put your computer down, make more space for the women. And so the point is we have to facilitate trade for women who form the majority of the trading.
President Adesina, what did you say earlier? When women win, Africa wins. So I think we'll take that as acknowledgement. Prime Minister, if we can again bring Lesotho into the equation and... Eswatini, apologies, Prime Minister, Eswatini. I was thinking of Lesotho on the other side, Your Majesty. If I can bring Eswatini back into the conversation. And if we can focus on the one change, sir, that you will make in the next 12 months in order to help Eswatini garner and integrate into economic integration across Africa? What is the one change that is in your power to make right now to drive the agenda?
The Kingdom of Eswatini has just launched what we call the strategic roadmap, which identifies 5 key sectors: tourism, energy and mining, manufacturing and agro-processing, ICT and education. And basically, the focus will be on unlocking value in those key sectors. One of the sectors is tourism, and we are talking about introducing e-visa, visa on arrival, and that is a target for us in the next 12 months to make sure that it's easy for people to move into the country, especially Africans. As mentioned earlier, we have made a bid to host the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. So there's a lot of work ahead of us if we do win that, to make sure that there is easy movement of people into the country. But I also want to also touch on what I think is really critical for Africa to embrace at this point. We are talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution, where we're talking about the new innovations, but I strongly believe that technology is going to be key for this free trade within Africa. We do need to embrace technology because it will allow us to leapfrog many countries when it comes to trade within Africa. A classic example is that in the Kingdom of Eswatini, we were able to move to increase financial inclusion within a space of about 6-7 years, from about 60% to almost 90% now, purely by using mobile technology. So that's why I strongly believe that we do need to invest in that. It's really great to see that the bank, the Africa Development Bank, is investing in telecommunications, in technology in the continent, and I think it's the right approach for the continent to make sure that we leapfrog and we accelerate trade within the continent.
President Tshisekedi, if I can bring you, sir, to the same point, what changes can you make as the man who is driving the change within the Democratic Republic of Congo? What changes can you make in the next 12 months to help with the Africa integration strategy?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We have engaged an experimental implementation of a project with regard to the diaspora, the Congolese diaspora, who are dual nationals, so we therefore did adopt a measure that would enable them to obtain a visa, not from their country of residence, but rather at the airport upon landing in Kinshasa or any other border point or point of entry. The goal of this measure, or the purpose of this operation, which would be extended at a later time to all African nationals, because we do think that we have to do away with such barriers, be they customs or immigration related, so as to enable the free movement of goods and persons. So the objective we are pursuing would be to promote within our program, to promote and champion human values, particularly for Congolese nationals, and therefore it would be all Africans that would be enjoying a promoted status through either trade or cultural exchanges. I do believe that in order to succeed in facing this challenge and to attain this objective African countries need to get organized in such a way that sub-regional communities manage to phase out such barriers. I don't believe that it can be done directly at a continental level. However, thanks to our sub-regions, for example, SADC, CEC, ECOWAS, and so on, we'll be able to organize this type of fluidity, which would be gradually broadened to the entire continent. And this is how we would succeed in connecting such sub-regions one with the other, and finally, by the end of the day, the entire African continent.
You do so in 12 months to further the Africa integration strategy.
Madam Moderator, you will remember at the beginning of my intervention, I did say I usually don't sit on panels of this nature. That's because there's a reason. I'm not an elected member or leader. For that reason, I cannot commit to saying what I can do.
So, Your Majesty, perhaps you can talk to the will of the people, what you would like to see happen.
What I would commit myself to do is that my job is to advise, my job is to persuade, cajole, sometimes twist an arm here and there.
Well, you don't have to go to the twisting an arm. Let's stay with the advising, the cajoling.
Yeah. So, of course, fortunately, I have my Minister of Finance and other ministers present and here, and they are listening, and they know what has to be done. They have seen the targets that have been set that we have to reach, and they know the benefits and that can be accrued from regional integration. So, getting back home, I will just tell them, look, this is what you have heard, and this is what has to be done. Please, let's go and do it, and allocate enough resources, make policies that can allow and enable for this to happen. So that is the only way I can answer your question.
President Obiang Nguema Mbosogo, if we can take you on exactly the same path, sir. 12 months out, we're looking at what Equatorial Guinea can do in terms of furthering Africa integration.
Señora.
Moderator, I have explained that Equatorial Guinea has always accepted integration. In the year 1980, Equatorial Guinea participated in a conference, economic conference in Lagos, and we accepted integration. That's why we are members of CEMAC, even though we have cultural differences, but we've always been for integration. But I'd like to tell you a story. As Mr. Rossini had explained, had told about the story on the plane with the ladies, and I wish to tell you about a recent story. In spite of the fact that we accept free circulation and we have signed the agreement, but what happened is that Equatorial Guinea was had to be persuaded to accept a free circulation in the space of CEMAC. And a few weeks ago, because this was in November 2017, we signed a free movement in a conference in N'Djamena, in Chad. But when I returned to my country a few weeks later, we suffered a mercenary attempt from the north, more than 1,000 kilometers, to invade Equatorial Guinea. That is the reason why we accept free circulation, integration, but there have to be rules. Those that circulate is the poor population, and Equatorial Guinea understands that and accepts it. But now, when it's transnational delinquents that will be causing problems to certain states, that could minimize the good effects of integration. That's why the governments have to create awareness to the people. But free circulation and movement should be gradually, can't be massive. Those that circulate more, that travel more, is the poor population that are in search of resources. But in spite of that, they do it, and their intentions are positive. But when we register attempts of individuals which would like to cause problems for states, for instance, in Equatorial Guinea, we wouldn't have any problem. But violence comes far away from our borders, and we also have to educate the police. If we don't have police well trained in order to identify the people, then that would be a difficulty. So we do agree, but what we have to do is to promote training, natural human resources, and currently we have registered attacks, terrorist attacks in many countries. And the first thing we need to do is to investigate who is behind this, who is financing terrorism in Africa. Because before, it didn't occur. But now we have terrorism everywhere, and particularly in the Western countries. And there's enormous loss of lives. But who is behind the terrorist attacks? That's what we have to find out. Integration is possible. But when integration is accompanied by violence, then it will result in instability for the African country. So we have to work in this sense and educate the people.
Your Excellencies, we've got time. We've got 7 minutes left on the stage on that satellite platform across the African continent. And I want to move now to one idea that each of you have for overcoming implementation challenges when it comes to Africa's economic integration. So, President Adesina, I'm going to start with you, sir.
Well, I just want to go back to what President Obiang said about the importance of linguistic barriers. Linguistic barriers is also one of the reasons why it's very difficult for us to trade more among ourselves. And here, we're not, the bank launched recently what's called a Lusophone Compact, because you have countries that are actually Portuguese-speaking countries that can trade a lot among themselves. And that Lusophone Compact we did with Portugal. We're also working with Brazil, so that, language doesn't become the issue. And that Lusophone Compact is to leverage about $5 billion for the countries that are Portuguese-speaking. And I think President Obiang was also talking about that. I think that's important. But I'll add two things, not just one idea, because it's a complicated world when you talk of integration that needs to be done. The second thing which I think we really need to do is to make sure that we are integrating all our financial markets. It's not just about roads. It's not just about ports. We've got to make sure all the capital markets, all the stock exchanges are well integrated across the continent. And that's why the bank is really we've launched a major effort to do that, from Cairo to Casablanca to Lagos to Johannesburg to Windhoek and all that, so that we can integrate. Money has to be able, interoperability, money must be able to flow across the continent. And finally, I think the issue that's very critical is that we must build the capacity of our institutions. The African Union, for example, they're leading all these efforts on the continental free trade area. I mean, we from the bank, we've invested $4.8 million to build that institutional capacity. But not just only for them. I think the presidents have said this. It's also for the regional economic communities. So I think building the right capacity for institutions integrating our financial markets are very, very critical. But also we must make sure that it's not just the borders, but the linguistic barriers. We have to make sure, well, maybe we all should all learn all the languages. We should learn from Spanish to Portuguese and French and English, just like we speak. And that will make sure that we can move around and trade better with ourselves.
Prime Minister, we're building on the solutions as we go along the panel. We've heard 3 definitives from President Adesina. Let's get your sense, sir.
His Majesty King Mswati III, who is the head of state of the Kingdom of Eswatini, advocates very strongly for peace and stability and for collaboration. As one of the leaders in the continent, he is really promoting more economic transformation, and I think that is really what the agenda that we would like to push as a country in the continent, because Africa is plagued with conflict, with corruption, and the view is that we need to graduate to a much higher, superior level, and that of economic liberation, collaboration, supporting each other, and really working towards a common goal, and that of improving the overall standard of living for the people of Africa. And that is really what His Majesty is really advocating for, even with the Africa Continental Free Trade area. His vision is to see Africa integrate more, trade more, and advance economically, and that we have less strife when it comes to conflict and war and instability.
President Tshisekedi, your implementation of a solution.
Bien.
In my opinion, I think we should attain 3 objectives. The first is to overcome this issue of insecurity that we see in all the continent. Secondly, I think we need to reach our economic objective. I think we need to, of course, fall away. To fall away all these barriers which, in fact, do impede the free exchange of goods and services. And then it's the cultural objective also that we need to attain. I think we need to inculcate new values amongst our populations, values such as the fight against corruption, the fight, for example, against issues like ethnicity and tribal. We need to promote women, because women are an essential component, of course, in all economic exchanges. They are an essential vector, and certainly towards the success of economical exchanges. And, of course, education. Access to education is a fundamental factor, because it is thanks to this education.
His Majesty, now we've got 1 minute 22 on the clock. We will be losing satellite time in 1 minute 22. Your Majesty.
Well, I can only answer your question from the platform from which I occupy. And this would be a platform which would instruct me to say that economic integration cannot be effective unless we develop the human being and our human capital. So, which basically means going to the ministers and showing them they know the figures. This is how much we are losing if we don't develop our human capital. So that would be my answer to that question.
And President Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, the last word to you, sir.
Señora Moderadora.
Moderator, I've indicated before some difficulties. For example, the cultural barriers and the linguistic barriers. I spoke of the security at the borders of the states, but I can point out another barrier we see among African countries, which is the national selfishness. The leaders the institutions in African countries, they always want to develop on their own within the national sphere. There is no contemplation so that development may be also for other countries. That is, we have why we have commercial trade barriers. We have to eliminate those barriers so that integration, economic integration and trade will be free, will be done freely without those difficulties that I've indicated. And also, I would like to mention the national selfishness. Some people want to withdraw into a shell, their national shell. They don't want to know about what's happening in other countries. That's another problem, which I think we have to struggle against it. We have to put an end to that national selfishness of some leaders in some countries.
I'm going to borrow from both the President of Equatorial Guinea and the Finance Minister of Equatorial Guinea. They both quoted the late, great Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it is done. Ladies and gentlemen, it is being done. Here's to celebrating Africa's economic integration. Thank you so much for joining us as a live audience, and thank you to those that have tuned in across the African continent. It has been our pleasure.
Okay, Excellencies, may you please allow the governors to move to the photo wall outside using that door that is just straight as I'm looking at it there, with a green exit that says Salida. The governors, please proceed to the photo wall for the photograph. And soon after the photograph will be the high-level luncheon by invitation. The governors will be joined by the heads of state and government for the photograph. Thank you very much.